New Delhi has a visitor, the King of Bhutan, King Jigme Kheser Namagyal Wangchuk. He is in India till Wednesday. The invitation went out from the Rashtrapati Bhavan. The timing of the visit is interesting, to say the least. It comes within days of a statement from Bhutan, a sensational statement from Bhutan's Prime Minister. We told you about it last week. Bhutan's Prime Minister is Lote Tshering. He spoke about the Doklam issue and he said China has an equal say in resolving the dispute. Quick primer. Doklam is a part of Bhutan. China stakes claim on it. In 2017, China tried to build a road through it, through Doklam. Bhutan sought India's help. And India almost went to war with China over it. Let me repeat that. India almost went to war to secure Bhutanese territory. And now Bhutan is legitimizing China's claim on it. So India was concerned. Last week's statement led to a lot of speculation. Was India losing influence? Was Bhutan making undue concessions to China? And how would it impact India's security and territorial integrity? We discussed all of it last week because this is a very sensitive and strategically important piece of land we are talking about. And in this backdrop, the King of Bhutan has landed in India. It's a 3-day visit. He's not traveling alone. With him is the Bhutanese foreign minister, also some other senior government officials. The king's itinerary is packed. He will have 2 high-profile meetings in India, one with India's President, Draupadi Murmu, and another with India's Prime Minister, Narendra Modi. And the significance of this cannot be overstated. Do you remember when the King of Bhutan was in India last? In 2022. He was on his way to the funeral of Queen Elizabeth. He made a stopover in Delhi. It's not even been 1 year since then. And a lot has happened since his last visit. China and Bhutan have held border talks. Bhutanese officials have been traveling to Beijing for discussions. And in the days ahead, a Chinese technical team is expected to land in Bhutan. So there's been a lot of engagement. And apparently some progress too. India was watching all of this when the Prime Minister of Bhutan made his statement. Let me recap for you what he said. He was talking about Doklam, and I'm quoting, "It's not up to Bhutan alone to solve the problem. There are 3 of us. There is no big or small country. There are 3 equal countries, each counting for a third." So Bhutan's Prime Minister gave an equal say to China. And this has direct implications for India. Like I said, the Doklam Valley is strategically important. It connects India's northeastern states with the rest of the country. Chinese control on Doklam could hurt India's access to the northeast. So India has been backing Bhutan's claims on Doklam. In 2017, there was a standoff. China wanted to build a road and India sent troops to halt Chinese construction. That standoff lasted for 73 days. Now China has changed tack. It is trying to get Bhutan to settle the dispute diplomatically and to not involve India. New Delhi did not comment on the Bhutanese Prime Minister's statement, but the media in India covered it, and Bhutan issued a clarification. It said there was nothing new in the Prime Minister's statement. There was no change in Bhutan's position. Some Bhutanese experts have also weighed in. They said Indian media reports have blown the issue out of proportion. Again, New Delhi has chosen silence for now and refuses to link the king's visit with the Prime Minister's statement. It's being said that the visit was planned some time back. Either way, it will be interesting to see if the border issue comes up in the talks. This will be Bhutan's chance to clear the air at the highest level, exchange notes with their Indian counterparts and settle concerns. As for India, it cannot afford to get this one wrong. So one US ally is buying Russian oil, another is visiting China. We're talking about French President Emmanuel Macron. He's going to China. With him will be European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. They're scheduled to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping on Wednesday. And Macron is taking a delegation of French business leaders with him, much like German Chancellor Olaf Scholz did last year. He visited China. Now the French president and the EU chief are going. The trend is quite clear. With zero COVID gone, Europe is looking to get back in business with Beijing. It may seem a bit hypocritical because every other week, Europe chastises China for supporting Russia. They keep needling China over its oil purchases from Russia. They keep complaining about China helping Russia bypass Western sanctions, and yet when it comes down to it, European business interests trump Ukrainian lives, it seems. Let me show you the numbers. In 2020, China overtook the US as the EU's top trade partner. Bilateral trade was $709 billion. This is between China and the EU in 2020, the year China exported a pandemic, $709 billion. In 2021, when the pandemic was still raging, trade went up to $732 billion. And remember, this was despite zero COVID. Between 2019 and 2021, the EU's imports from China went up by 30%. And Europe too has been pouring money into China. Between 2018 and 2021, Europe made up 80% of global investment in China, 80%. The volumes are very high, so much so that Europe-China trade has been described as too big to fail, which explains why European leaders go to China all the time, despite domestic and international tensions. Take the case of Macron. He's traveling while his country is rocked by protests, because Europe depends on Chinese trade. So when they say tough words, slamming China, it means very little. Listen to this. This is what the EU chief said about China last week.
Far from being put off by the atrocious and illegal invasion of Ukraine, President Xi is maintaining his no-limits friendship with Putin. These escalatory actions point to a China that is becoming more repressive at home and more assertive abroad. This is why it is vitally important that we ensure diplomatic stability and open communication with China. I believe it is neither viable nor in Europe's interest to decouple from China. Our relations are not black or white, and our response cannot be either.
She started by criticizing China, then went on to say that Europe-China relations are not black and white, which is all very well and convenient. And now she's heading to China. Reports say the EU chief will take a tough stand with President Xi Jinping. She's supposed to be the bad cop in the meeting, which means Macron will likely play the good cop. Of course, they'll discuss the war in Ukraine and urge China to help. They'll try and pressure Xi Jinping into using his influence over Russian President Vladimir Putin. China is expected to push its 12-point peace plan, the same one that Xi unveiled in Moscow last month. And the Europeans are expected to reject it because China wants a ceasefire with Russia retaining the land it has captured. It's a plan that suits Russia and China, but the West is not on board, and for obvious reasons. So Beijing's much-wanted peace plan is a dud. Yet Macron says China could be a quote-unquote game changer in the war. Which game are they changing, we ask? Does all of Europe's support for Ukraine pale in front of the yuan? Why is Europe willing to risk Washington's ire by doing business with Beijing? Because remember, US-China relations are at historic lows. Washington has ramped up export controls. It is trying to stop Beijing from accessing advanced American computer chips. And the US has been putting a lot of pressure on all its allies to do the same. Why then are these very allies cozying up to Beijing? Like I said, it's about business. The US has made some moves that hurt European interests. Subsidies given out by the Biden administration could hurt Europe. Companies could relocate from Europe to the US due to Biden's actions, and these measures have caused a rift in the united Western Front. Europe is looking to protect its interests, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But if that's really what it's about, the world could do without Europe's holier-than-thou attitude. And we have some disturbing news from Africa. A virus outbreak in 2 African nations has put the world on guard. This too is linked to bats, and it's bringing back fears of how the pandemic began. Of course, nobody wants a repeat, and this one is proving to be deadlier. It's called the Marburg virus. It causes hemorrhagic fever, and the fatality rate is very high. The virus belongs to the Ebola family, which is why countries are worried and have begun issuing advisories. What is the Marburg virus and how does it spread? Also, should you be worried? Here's a report.
A virus that kills half the people it infects and brings about a fever that leads to internal bleeding. Patients bleed in several parts of their body, and it's often the blood loss that takes their lives. The symptoms are unbearable. If you've been to Africa or have come in contact with somebody who has, you should watch out for these symptoms: high fever, muscle pain, bleeding, severe headaches, diarrhea, and vomiting blood. This could mean you have contracted the Marburg virus. The virus belongs to the Ebola family, and it has the world on edge. 2 African countries are battling a Marburg virus outbreak. One is Tanzania and the other is Equatorial Guinea. In Tanzania, 5 people who contracted the virus have died. Authorities are mapping their contacts and trying to figure out the extent of the virus spread. In Equatorial Guinea, 9 people have died. This was when the country had about 13 confirmed cases. Let me repeat, 9 people died out of the 13 that caught the virus. The virus's fatality rate is the biggest worry. It has a kill rate of anywhere between 24 to 88%. Here's some perspective. Peru has the highest COVID-19 fatality rate, and that's 5%. So the Wuhan virus is a dwarf compared to the Marburg virus. And the world is certainly not prepared for a virus that kills nearly half the people it infects, which is why countries are on alert. On the 31st of March, US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention urged travelers to beware. They've been advised to stay away from sick people and keep an eye out for symptoms. The US is also sending personnel to Africa to help control the outbreak. They're assisting with testing and contract tracing. Saudi Arabia and the UAE have advised citizens not to travel to Tanzania and Equatorial Guinea. Like COVID-19, the Marburg virus has a lot to do with bats. It was initially transmitted to humans from fruit bats. African green monkeys and pigs can also be carriers of the virus. And like COVID-19, the Marburg virus too has a lot to do with labs. The Marburg virus was first recognized in 1967. There were simultaneous outbreaks of the virus in labs across Germany's Marburg and Frankfurt and Serbia's Belgrade. So far, the virus has not made its way out of Africa except in very isolated cases. In the past 40 years, only 2 cases of the Marburg virus have been reported out of Africa. Previously, cases of the Marburg virus have been reported from Ghana, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Kenya, South Africa, Uganda, and Zimbabwe. The most severe outbreak was reported in Angola in 2005. The virus killed more than 300 people in Angola. Now to the million-dollar question. Is there a vaccine against the virus? Unfortunately, there isn't. There's also no proper treatment regime. But the treatment of specific symptoms like fever or internal bleeding can be helpful. Experts also recommend staying hydrated. The key is to identify the symptoms and seek medical intervention as soon as possible.